Hey guys, oh gosh. I floated to Med Surg today, and as an ICU nurse floating to Med Surg, I've got to say that I think that was a pretty good day. And I can say that because I was a Med Surg for most of my career, so that's actually saying quite a lot. And being transitioning into this unit and being able to say that after floating to a different unit that's not my home unit, and also a new Med Surg unit that isn't from a hospital that I'm super familiar with. I've been working at this facility for about a month and a half, and this is, a new charting system, this is new layout, this is new policies and procedures, all the good stuff, all the stuff. But I have an advantage, and that is that I've been a Med Surg nurse before I was an ICU nurse for, I don't know, I told 2 people today that I'm coming up on my 12-year anniversary of becoming an RN, and most of it, I'd say probably 9 years. I've worked probably 9 years in some version of Med Surg tele. So I have quite the experience and the background to tackle and I guess feel calm and collected in a situation like that, because the truth of it is, when you float, when you work on Med Surg, you always feel behind. You feel like you're always running behind, like there's always something that you're catching up on, and there are times where it feels manageable. Like, I can't remember the last time I truly felt caught up when taking care of 5 patients, let alone 4 patients. And I think that if anybody here is watching and you work Med Surg, God bless you. And if you've worked Med Surg for over 10 years, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how people make a career out of Med Surg, because it's just so hard on the body. We get short-staffed on Med Surg a lot. And when you work on Med Surg, what's the one thing that you don't want to be without? I want to hear from you, first of all. What do you think is the one thing that you would never want to be without? And for me, the answer is a CNA. And I worked at a facility before this one where we didn't have CNAs. There were no CNAs there. It was just nurses, and we just grabbed each other if we needed help turning or needed help boosting up or doing, but we did all our own vitals, we did everything, baths, all the things. And that was a lot of work. And it's very difficult to play the nurse and the CNA role at the same time. And I would say that the one thing that I do not want to be without on a Med Surg floor is a CNA. And that's exactly what happened today when I got floated. And they pulled the CNAs to the ER to do sitter stuff. And that means, the person needed to have a 1-to-1 for whatever reason, I didn't get the details, but usually that's for a suicidal patient coming into the ER, or some other dangerous behavior where they can't be left alone, and they need to be watched, and the hospital is liable to make sure that they stay safe. And they had to pull the CNAs to ensure that happened. That was probably the scenario. I don't know. But I floated, and all the nurses, I felt like I probably had the best assignment, which is, a lot of times it doesn't happen when you float. You get the patients that everyone else has been taking care of for however long. There's a lot of patients that get stuck on Med Surg units because they have trouble placing the patients in long-term care facilities. They have issues that you can't fix, they can't find a placement for them for whatever reason, and the patient stays in the hospital longer than they really should because of this. And a lot of times when you float, you get all the patients that have been staying there for forever, and they're challenging, and they're a lot, they call it heavy acuity, high acuity, heavy patients. So I had a little bit of that today, but it could have been worse. It's a perspective statement, right? It could always be worse, but I definitely felt like the other nurses, we were supposed to have break relief. The break relief got pulled. The only way it could have been worse is if charge was in the count, which they weren't. So I was really grateful for that, because I had to ask questions, being somebody who was not familiar. I had one day of orientation on that unit, and I had to ask questions to find out like where stuff was, what the codes to the doors were, and that all takes time. So she was great. I was really thankful for her, but everyone was so funny. They were like making little jokes. It's like one of those things where if you don't laugh, you cry. So everyone's like trying to laugh and like make lighthearted of the situation that's just difficult, because going back to, what I was saying earlier, you always feel like you're behind on Med Surg in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like there's like green, yellow, and red versions to being behind. And like red would be a version like you're already drowning, you're already super behind, and then one of your patient's codes, or you have to RT them, and then another patient needs blood or something. Having to be in multiple places at once is something that you encounter almost every day on a Med Surg floor, and that multitasking I feel like is so difficult to manage. I feel like it can be really dangerous. I talked about in another video that I feel like distraction and needing to be in multiple places at once and getting phone calls and getting people calling your name and all that stuff puts nurses at higher risk for medication errors and making errors that we can't be making, because this is lives. So you really have to be vigilant. You have to be on it. And I think Med Surg, sometimes you got to be really careful when you're working 12-hour shifts, because towards the end of the shift you get so tired. You got to check everything super closely and make sure that everything is right, and don't do anything fast even though you're running out of time. I think it's just hard. I think one of the tough positions I've always felt in Med Surg is you feel like no matter what you do, there's always going to be something you fall short on. And I think it's because if you don't finish something because you're taking your time to do something and you're making sure you're doing safe care, you might get criticized by the oncoming colleague for not finishing everything on the list. Which one time, one of the nurses I worked with, I thought this was like the most gracious, amazing thing any RN has ever said, and that was that, I didn't finish something, or something had been passed on to her, and I was like, I feel bad about this. I was telling her, and she goes, "Don't worry, it's 24-hour care." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you're totally right. Like, why has nobody else presented that perspective to me before? Why has nobody else said that mindset to me before?" And so now I like to say that I think that is so funny, and it's true too, because if you can't wrap everything up perfectly in a bow and hand it off to the next nurse, sometimes I think there should be some grace for that. But sometimes people complain. Sometimes you get people who don't have the greatest attitude and they don't want to be there, and it's just life. You get that everywhere you go. It's not just healthcare. So you got to bring a good attitude to work, and you have to bring a graceful perspective, I believe, for the patients and the staff and the colleagues that you work with. And I think today I was just really glad that I felt like, even though I felt like I was behind, I felt like everything kind of gotten taken care of to the best that I could. And I think that I really did a good job keeping up even when I was new to the floor. And I even got grilled by a patient's family member who was an RN. That's like one of our worst nightmares, right? Is like being grilled by healthcare working family members who I would probably be the same exact way. So I try to be empathetic, but I think it can be anxiety inducing because they want the whole scoop, like they want the full report. So I'm grateful. I haven't been placed in that situation. I'm thankful to God. But I would be I just try to think of it like if that was my mom, or if that was my dad or sibling or whatever family member, I would like be asking questions. Nobody cares as much about your family member as you do. And so when I take care of people, I try to just remember that. And I try to think like, if this were my family member, how would I be treating this person? It's a good way to be thinking. It's a good way to think that way, because you think like, what would I want to do if this were my family member? Like, how would I treat them? How would this go? Like, what would I want the doctor to do? Or what answers would I want here and there? Anyway, food for thought. But yeah, the aids were pulled, and we were just busting it out, turning meds, replacing potassium. My lady's electrolytes were low. We found out that her diet hadn't been advanced from clear liquids for like 3 days, and she was getting weaker, and her electrolytes were depleting, and nobody had done anything about it. And I was just like, couldn't figure out why nothing had been done about it. So we got that advanced, and that felt good to help her do that. I was taking care of a patient who was a war veteran, and he ripped his IV out, and it was so, the crazy part about this is that he was such a nice guy. Like, he was such a nice guy, and he just knew what he wanted. He said ripping his IV out was an accident, but I don't know, sometimes you wonder if people are just saying something so it sounds better, and I just didn't really know what to think, because how do you accidentally rip something out that's taped and secured? And I had already secured it for him at the beginning of the day, because I found him in a situation where he was almost going to pull it out, and so I was like, oh my gosh, I had to redo the dressing and everything, and just make sure, because another thing that you don't want when you are working is to have to place a new IV the second you get to work, because then you do that and it's already like you're behind, and that's just not the time. It happens all the time, but it's just not ideal. You deal with it, but it's not great. Anyway, so I didn't want to do that. I had saved the IV, and all of a sudden he somehow pulled it out, and he was not supposed to be walking around the hallway. He had a certain condition where he wasn't supposed to be out of his room, and I don't know, it was just, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't like to fight with people. I like people to be respected. I like to give people autonomy, but sometimes it's just so difficult when there's so many policies, and like for the betterment of others, and like the greater good of the health of other people, like if the person should be out of their room. And sometimes it's just hard when people don't listen and aren't cooperative. But he was nice, so that he had that going for him, and he was articulate in what he wanted. I felt like he was a reasonable person otherwise, but I don't know, sometimes people are just impulsive, and they sound reasonable, and then they do something that's just out of character for how they're coming off. It's just kind of funny, the personalities that you meet when you take care of people. And so I called the doctor, and he was insistent that he didn't need to be there. He needed to leave and go to a funeral tomorrow, and she worked him up. She did some tests and was able to discharge him. So I'm grateful he got what he wanted. I'm grateful that he didn't really need to be in the hospital anymore. Felt bad that he had lost somebody close to him. He was telling me a little bit about the person, the good memories, and there was I guess the person that passed, they didn't have very good teeth or something at one point in their life. They ended up getting them fixed, but I guess the person had a blind date set up, and he recommended to this person, just put chiclet gum on your teeth. Put chiclet gum over your teeth during the date, and they won't even know. So I said, oh, that's so cute. Like, what a funny suggestion. Like, haha, like thinking like no one would ever do that. And then come to find out they actually did do that. And then lo and behold, as soon as they started eating and drinking on the date, the gum started falling off their teeth. And I just thought, like, I have never heard of anything like this before. This is so wacky and so out there. Like, people are so weird. There's just so many crazy things that people do. Like, just as soon as you think you've heard it all, something else happens and proves you wrong. And with that, I hope you guys have a good night. I just got home, and you take care. Bye.